So, back in January, I began reading Moomintani no Juichigatsu, a Japanese translation of the last Moomins book, Moominvalley in November. And this is because I've been learning Japanese since roughly last October. And when I was learning German, I found that one of the things that gave me the most help, one of the things that gave me most of my progress, was by reading long form books and getting in a large amount of vocabulary. And so when it came to Japanese, I knew that I wanted to start out as soon as possible by actually reading a full length novel. And so I picked the Moomins because that's kind of my favorite book series, and I'd been reading Moominvalley in November a lot, and so I thought, well, I know the book very well, so if I read it in Japanese, I'll have a general idea throughout where I am and what's going on, even if, I get lost in the vocabulary or the sentence structure. Because Japanese has been really daunting for me, not only because of the kanji or the alphabets, but rather because there's so much grammar to learn and so many situations where the grammar is used in different ways. And just doing that through examples in a textbook wasn't really getting me anywhere. I wasn't really remembering anything. And so I felt, well, what if I get a book which is going to have a ton of different situations and different characters of different ages and statures or, genders talking to each other. And so you get all of these different ideas and you get to see all these different grammatical concepts in action. So overall, the book took me just under 6 months to read. I began it in mid-January and now it's mid-July and I finished it. And that's actually largely on target for me. I thought it was going to take most of the year to read because I felt that I was going to be struggling through one page a day, and the book is 300 pages in Japanese. But fortunately, I was able to get roughly 2 pages a day. Some days I would get up to 8 pages through. It depended on how dense it was in prose versus dialogue, because dialogue is much quicker to read and it's much more repetitive. So my initial approach was something that I had done when I was doing German, which was a mistake, and that was to try and do every single word of a page. So I'd read through a sentence and try and translate it word by word. And what I found very quickly was that that was getting me nowhere. It was really painful, and it just. The problem is that it's really slow going, and what you will often find is that you can understand a sentence but not understand what you will often find is that you can understand a sentence but not understand every word, and that if you're trying to understand every single word all the time, it's going to take years to get through because there's so many new words that you will learn when you do a new book in Japanese. What I decided to do instead to revise my approach was to read through the book at just the normal pace. So if I didn't understand a word, then I would just keep going and try to understand everything sentence by sentence, page by page. And what I used was a software called Anki, which is a time-based flashcard software. So if I saw a word cropping up a lot, or a set of kanji cropping up a lot, I would take that and I would put it into Anki. And so then every day I would revise the word. I'd look over it again, see if I remembered it or not. And the better I do, the less often I will see the word. And so that helped because it allowed me to still learn words and still go through, but also not be bogged down by I have to learn every single word as it comes. And if I don't remember it all, then I can't move on the page. And that also goes into the grammar and the reading of it, because there's so many grammatical concepts in Japanese, especially because the verbs are so agglutinative. If you want to learn a new way that a verb is formed, it's about mashing things onto the end of the verb rather than just inserting new words. Like in English, you would go, I want to run, I like to run, I hate to run, I will run. Whereas in Japanese, it's more like, I run continue, I run like, I run am will. And that can be really confusing, and so it's important through the reading of it that you get to see all these different forms, and gradually, like once I learned the verb tsuzuku or tsuzukeru, I learned the two versions of continue, the transitive and intransitive versions. And so this meant that suddenly all of these extra conjugations and all these extra verb formations became so much easier for me to do. And that's something that I would have only learned through the reading of it. If I had just been going in a textbook, I might not have encountered that very much. And so I feel like the reading has helped with the grammar, especially because I had been reading through Genki and I had been reading through the Taken Guide. And so I was able to see these grammatical concepts almost in real time in actual use. And so there's a lot of things that I was able to pick up, like I picked up mitai, or mitai, and that means to be similar to or like. And so to say, oh, that's a horror-like, or that's red-ish sort of conjugation. And so that would just be randomly pasted onto the end of words and sentences. And I had always struggled to be like, what does this mean? Why is this here? And it was only because it cropped up so much in the Moomins that I thought, this is actually a construction rather than being a noun or a verb or an adjective. And so through looking at it and through seeing it all the time, I finally decided to actually look it up. And now whenever I encounter it, it makes a lot more sense and it's a lot easier to use. I think an important thing also to think about is, is that this book has furigana in it. It tells you how the kanji are pronounced. And this has its benefits and its drawbacks. The obvious benefit is that I was able to read through it quickly and I was able to look up kanji very easily. But the drawback is that I feel like I didn't remember as many kanji as I would have liked to. Especially because after a while you kind of, even for the kanji you kind of see yourself being drawn to the furigana on the side. And fortunately this is helped a little by Anki, where in Anki you don't see the furigana, and so you have to remember the kanji. But I do think in the future I want to look at more texts that do not have furigana so that I'm forced to remember a bit more. And so of course the question for all you Moomins fans is, how well does the book translate? And obviously I can't be the best judge because I'm only still learning Japanese, but I have to say I'm really impressed with it. What I'm impressed by is how a lot of care was put into the way the characters interact with each other. Like, you'll see how the older characters will use washi, or the feminine characters will use the feminine particles. Or I've talked about in previous videos how the Hemulin, when trying to sound deep, will use very long and deep words like imi shincho that are totally ill-fitting, but that's good for the book because his words are ill-fitting and meant to sound clunky and pretentious. And so I think it's actually, if you are looking for the Moomins in another language, then Japanese is a really good version to read it in. And if you're trying to find something to read in Japanese, I would strongly recommend reading Moominvalley in November. In the future, I'm probably going to move on to a copy of Moominvalley Midwinter that I have, which is also in Japanese, but this lacks a lot of the furigana that was in Moomin Tani no Juichigatsu. And so hopefully that'll mean that I learn a little bit more kanji and that I'm forced to use my brain, because by the end of this I was very good at reading hiragana and katakana, and I had learned some kanji, but also I found myself looking way too much at the phonetic guides, and I think I need to move on to not using the phonetic guides in the future. So do I feel more confident now that I've done this? I do. I feel like I've definitely seen a lot more of what I need to learn. Like, there's definitely times where I was kind of lost a bit in the grammar, and so I need to get better at that, especially for longer sentences, to kind of understand how to parse longer sentences. But definitely I feel like Japanese is much more approachable. You know, I've read 300 pages now of solid text, and so that's going to make it a lot easier for me in the future to not be daunted by the idea that I have to read in Japanese or that I have to read in these other syllabaries or kanji. And so I think it's definitely given me the tools and confidence to move on to even more complicated things in the future. But yeah, have you guys ever read a book in any other language? Have you read a Moomins book in another language? What were your thoughts on it? And like, comment, subscribe, touch grass.